So you might want to take a little bit of notes, because I'm going to have a little short quiz in this one. Yeah, you don't get to listen to me babble for an hour. And there should be plenty of time at the end, so you might be thinking about what your questions want to be, and I would really, I learn a lot from the communities that are engaged in these things, so I really want to encourage towards the end more of a back and forth dialogue. So, we're all here to kind of do the same thing. We're here to find, look at the documents, see what's in there, and begin the process of extracting information. So what I've done is I've just gone ahead and selected a couple of pieces of our document that happen to have information about photographs and pictures in it, just to kind of give you a sense of what the process is for us to work through something like this. Now again, I would love to have an elder to turn to and ask questions, because I could get to my answers much more quickly, right? So nothing replaces a knowledgeable elder. When you have to turn to archival work and documentation, it's a longer process, and it requires some other skills. I'm also not going to go into the linguistics, okay, because I'm more interested in you seeing the process. So what I've done is I've taken the vocabulary from here and I've already transcribed it for you into our modern orthography, our modern spelling system. And I've gone ahead and quoted how it was translated in the records. I want to preserve that because that can be important. So here's Kik Shinga. And Dunn in 1900 said, well, that's a picture in general. So I assume that just means any old picture, right? Dunn also said on that card, Kik Shinga is a picture that does not show the face. Okay, interesting. Albert Gatschet, before Dunn, he was the predecessor, said Kikingwe Shinga is a portrait, a photograph, likeness, literally anything that's taken. And then, clear back in the 1700s, we find buried in the records, Kik Shinga Muswa, a picture of a deer. And Dunn also recorded Misula Kikasenge, a picture of a boat. Okay, well, that's what we got to work with. Now, what was interesting about this when we stumbled across this a few years ago, all of the morphology, so remember what a morpheme is? It's a part of a word with meaning. All of the morphology we already knew. We saw them in other terms. What we didn't have was this arrangement of morphology to give us a new meaning. There's a limited number of morphemes in our language. There's an unlimited number of words that can be created with that. So because the morphology, the individual parts of the words were already familiar to us, we were able to begin the process of extracting what we needed and then contextualizing it for what's needed today. So all of those words have kik on the front of it. And kik is a morpheme that's stuck onto the front of a word, so it's called an initial in our work, and it means to know, identify, depict, indicate. And kik is found in other terms like kikahamane, I choose it, kike lemake, I know him, kike penalake, I mark him for identification. So you kind of get a sense of what kik is there. Notice there's 4 different English translations for kik is an idea, okay? So what we're trying to do is build a context for the idea. All of those words also have ishin and isen a state of being, or lies a certain way. And that morpheme is found in other words that we're already familiar with, like taltaka shinga, he's laying down. That taltak on the front means to be level, something's level. Pengashinga, it's in our word for sunset. Chikakwasengi, it lies alongside of something. Chikakwe is is the part that means alongside. Akwasenge, it is difficult. That akwe on the front is kind of like an intensifier. It's in our word for to be angry or to be really emotional about something. It's an intensifier. There's some intensive emotion there. So you kind of get a sense of what isen and ishin are, right? Not necessarily a real simple way to translate, but you start to get a sense of what it's doing in there. And then also, there's this last morpheme that's in that one word, ingwe, which means face or surface. And it is found in words like kipingweta, he has a dirty face. Onjingweta, he changes his expression. Onja just means to alter something. Shashipingweta, he stares, gazes for a long time. That sheep in there is the part that means long time, and the sha, it's reduplicated. In reduplication, where you take the first syllable and reduplicate it, in our language often means more of something. In this case, that's what it's getting at. Face or surface. And I don't really have any surface examples I didn't put in here. I didn't want to distract us too much. So let's look back at those terms. Mm-hmm. Again?
Is that indicating?
Yeah, the question is, what is the ta at the end? So these are all the person inflections. So that's the third person, he or she. There's no gender distinction in our language. So that's the he part, okay? So let's take a look at those words again. Kikshinga, muswa, a picture of a deer. Misula, or misuli, kikisenge, picture of a boat. And I had to pick somebody that was appropriate to Canada. Kikingweshinga, portrait, photograph, or likeness. So, what can you tell me about this? You saw, what was ingwe? What was ingwe? Anybody? Face. Right. So ingwe is popped in between kik and ishinge. Kikishinge? Kikishinga? See the ingwe in there? So this is a portrait. That's probably why Gatchett said it was a portrait. But he said a likeness of anything taken or something along those lines. But it actually means that it's a picture of someone's, and it has faces involved in it. So that one's pretty easy. These are pretty understandable. The only difference between a shin and a sen is that in our language there's the distinction between objects that are animate versus inanimate. And I use those terms cautiously because the definition of animate and inanimate doesn't actually transfer. But anyhow, in Algonquin linguistics, all Algonquin languages have this animate-inanimate classification of its nouns. So because of that, then there has to be noun-verb agreement. So there are verbs that are used with objects that are nouns and verbs that are used with objects that are inanimate. This is an animate or inanimate object. So this is kikishinga, picture of a deer. So this has a third person marker on the end, meaning he or she. Okay? Animate or inanimate? Inanimate. Kikisenge, this is the ending for an inanimate object. The ki at the end simply means it is. Okay? So this is inflected for it is, an it object, and this is inflected for a he or she object. So that's the only difference between ishin and isen. So from the get-go we know, oh, okay, so if you're going to talk about a photograph, what's in the photograph is important. And the language reflects that. Mm-hmm.
But also the word order is shifted too.
Excellent. Somebody pointed out word order. You see that? How the verb is first and the noun for deer, muswa, whereas boat, misule, is first. So word order is said to be flexible or free in Algonquin, not 100% of the time. There are some governing rules. But word order is free, and a lot of times it can be speaker choice. Sometimes what speakers will do is they'll put what is in their minds the most important thing at the front of the sentence. And that's probably what's happening here. But it's nice that you pointed out the word order. So now that we know this, I want to introduce you to a couple more terms. So, we got keek, and we got some other form of isin and a shin. We've got an ishim and a set, and I'll come back to that. Still got the third person markers, he or she. But look how these get translated. He writes his name. It's clear back in the 1700s. I put his name on the tribal roll right around 1900. What does keek mean? Remember? To depict, identify. Okay. Here's a treaty of 1701. Our ancestors traveled from the lower Great Lakes all the way up to Montreal, Canada to sign this treaty. Were they writing their names on these? There's the Miamia signature. Depict.
The different tribe?
Yep. Those are all the signatures of the different tribes on the treaty. And this was our people's signature. Are those names as we know them, written names? What are they? They're images, they're pictures.
They're crests?
Huh?
Are they crests?
There's probably lots of different ways to describe them. It could be clan symbols, it could be individual names. There are a lot of bird names in Miamia, so it's very likely what that is. I can't speak for the other groups, but notice that it's an image. So think of that keek on the front. Depict, right? So let's look at those two terms. Now, the only real difference, and this of course I've preserved how they were translated in the records. The only difference between these two terms and the other two terms we were looking at for picture is that these are transitive. So the other ones were not transitive. They were just simply describing a picture of a deer, a picture of a boat, right? These are transitive in that somebody's doing something to somebody, or somebody's doing something to it. That's what transitive means. So there's an action onto an object or onto another person. And in Miamia, it's an action onto something animate or inanimate. That's kind of how it works in our language. So this ending, isetu, is the transitive ending that implies you're doing something to it, the inanimate part, okay? So we see isetu, in other words, like Anguisetuka, he lays it in a pile. Nehisetuka, he did it well, properly. Now notice here there isn't actually an object involved, right? That's that state of being translation. So these endings, whether it's a shin, or isen, ishin, ishim, or isetu, can capture a state of being. And then Taltaki setuka, he lays it down. Remember what taltak meant? It means to be level. Remember I mentioned that earlier? So what does this mean, lay it down? Does that mean laying down a marble? No, something elongated, right? Because it's got to be made level. There's another word to put it down, as in something smaller. So again, this translation refers to something that becomes level when you lay it down. And the ishim is a transitive onto an animate object, in this case, a him or her. Ekole shimake, I dress him laying down. Okay, that's the laying down part. So the shim is found in words like this. I'm going to let you tell me what this word means. Tautake shimake. Tautake shimake. Tautake shimake. What's that mean? Take a guess?
Something down.
Something's laying down. What's the inflection on that? He, him. Huh?
Inanimate.
Okay. Are you getting a sense for what the morphemes mean and their meanings? Okay. Let's go back to our image. Based on what we just went through, ignore this for a minute. Describe what kikesetuka means. Not going to be a clean English definition for it, but describe it to me. What's kik? Depict. Depict. Isetu is it. Ka, he or she. He depicts it. He makes a drawing of it, right? Makes some image he's depicting. In this case, they could be clan symbols, personal names, whatever they may be. Okay? How about this? I depict him laying down, right? Something that's put in some state of existence, or in this case on paper, right? See how the understanding of the word is different from the translation that's been provided to you through the records. Okay? It's really critical that you develop that skill to understand the notions of the word and start to leave the English translations behind a little bit. They're good reference points because they'll draw you to things and they'll help you form those ideas, even though they're in English. But at some point, you kind of have to let those English translations go a little bit. So, these translations are what we call situational translations. Here are some just examples of situational translations. Pakochiwa, that's a third-person verb that means I have a swelled belly. Look how it was translated in the early Jesuit materials. Get it? This is how we translate it in our learning aids. Equisenge, look how it was translated. And this is how, because it can mean the end of a road too. It just means the end of something. Muingueta. Muningueta. Oh boy, I misspoke there. I'm not going to attempt to explain that to you. I wasn't there. But I know it was a cultural practice. They used to use clamshells to pluck hairs on their face. Newikelota. This is kind of interesting. So again, we know from our historical records, not our language records, just our historical records, that moving into the fields, we had vast, vast cornfields. Near harvest was a way, because all the animals wanted to take advantage of our harvest too, was a way to protect that cornfield. And so I build myself a house near something. That's all that's being expressed here. And then of course the last one, Namawike, just simply means I live collectively, in a group of something. So these are all situations. So these are mostly coming from the Jesuit records. The Jesuits are moving into these villages, and they're learning a language naturally. They're learning it in context. And so oftentimes in the early stuff, we see these kinds of translations that add very, very rich historical and cultural context for the language, right? And that can be very, very useful in itself. But understanding that it's not really the translation of the word. So, All right, now with our newfound knowledge, we've kind of got a sense of how to talk about pictures. We understand the historical context by which words were used to talk about the signing of treaties, putting names on the rolls. We have a better understanding of what those words are trying to represent, not based on the English translation. And when we pull that all together, that knowledge allows us to then expand the meanings of those terms for things that we need today, which is very, very critical. What does kikesetu as a verb? Now there's a hyphen here, which means it's not inflected. I don't have person marking on it. You see how I arrived at take a picture of it? Right? We have instruments now that produce images, right? 300 years ago in the village of the Illinois, they didn't have that. But the language they were using was about depicting things, usually with the hand, drawing, okay? And now we have objects that take those pictures. It's the same idea, different tool, okay? But the idea is still the same. So this can be expanded to include the taking of a picture as a verb form. We also know from lots of other examples that we can drop the "u" on the end of the stem and put an instrumental ending on it. An instrumental ending is very, very productive in our language, and it just means a thing that does something. In this case, takes a picture. Okay? So we put alkani on the end so that we could have a word, a noun, for a camera. Excuse me. The word for camera is not in our archival materials, at least that we know of. But now we have a word for camera. Mm-hmm.
What's the reason for them not playing with the first vowel in he, she takes a picture with his two eyes?
Ah, good question. You can tell the linguistics students here, they're picking up on all kinds of vowel changes and things. So in our language, we have what's called initial change, where the first vowel can be lengthened or changed under certain circumstances. I won't go into that, but it happens to be more with declarative language. Statements of fact, that vowel will change. So that's a unique feature in our language. It is shared in other languages as well. It's just simply called initial change. And it is showing up right here. What she's talking about is this ki as opposed to ki. In nouns, it tends to be short. All right, what's this mean? Kikishim. Kikishim alo. Take a picture of me. That's what we would say today. So I want you to see how we've made the transition from interpretation and language of 200 and some years ago, when the context was different, through time up until our new context today, so that we could have usable language. A living language does that naturally. But when languages cease to be spoken, there's kind of a break. And so revitalization is partly about re-engaging in that creative process to bring the language back into the forefront. You know, there are some cases where traditional practices are still happening, and then the language for those can remain relatively the same. But then there's new things happening in our world, and so our language has to be able to expand and change, and our knowledge of the language is very critical, and our knowledge of the context of when things were taken is very critical in order for us to move that forward. Okay, here's your test. You ready? I'm not going to give you the answer this time. If I tell you that the Miami word for a tree is tawane, how do you say a picture of a tree?
Do you consider a tree animate or inanimate?
Inanimate. And the way you know is that I on here. Inanimate things end in I, and animate nouns end in a. So good question. Is it animate or inanimate? How do you say a picture of a tree? Okay, linguistic students, I expect you guys to know this now. Pat tells me this is going to be part of your final. Those of you that are taking this for a class. Anybody want to guess? You guys are working hard.
Is it Kikisengi Tawana?
Kikisengi. If we're just describing it, right? Remember the boat, the picture of a boat? Tawana Kikisengi. Tawana Kikisengi. So these are pre-aspirated consonants. I know we were talking about sound yesterday. So that HS is a pre-aspirated, that's what the H is for us. It comes out just sounding like a long S. Kikisengi. Kikisengi.
Can you incorporate it like you did with face?
Pardon?
Can it be incorporated into the word like you did with face?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If I tell you the word for a butterfly is Kakatakalengua, which just means spotted wing, how would you say a picture of a butterfly? Is this animate or inanimate? See the A ending? That means animate. Kakatakalengua. Kikishinga. Kikishinga. Kakatakalengua kikishinga. A picture of a butterfly. If I tell you that our word for baby is palusa, yeah, Taniji Wenge, how would you say it? Kikingwe. Kikingwe Shinga. Kikingwe Shinga. Yeah, Mayawa Tepe. Mayawa Tepe. All right. So, that's a simple example of how we work through to understand and to arrive at new terminology and to begin just really processing large and large amounts of material that gives us more and more context and more understanding of our language. Again, nothing can short circuit turning to a speaker and asking either how to say something or what something means or what the differences is. You know, there's been so many times that I wish we had that resource, but we don't. And that doesn't mean there's not gaps and holes in our knowledge system. But working from what we have allows us to begin to move forward in some fashion. All right, the last couple of slides are pretty straightforward. I'm going to put my mic down just to do a quick demo here. So if you've got massive amounts of materials, how do you organize that? So one of the things you'll do as you begin to come across manuscripts is to create some sort of an outline for that manuscript. It's very, very useful. A lot of Breath of Life folks do it. Whether you have a 10-page or if you have a 200-page, you know, as you leaf through it, you'll start to say, oh, look, here's all the kinship terms, or here's the animal names, or here's plant names, or whatever it may be. And so you can create a kind of an outline on a separate sheet of paper that allows you to get back into that document relatively efficiently and easily so you can find the things. It's the finding thing that you want to do. So you leave Breath of Life, you go home, a couple months go by, and you say, oh, geez, you know what, that word for my aunt's sister, you know, how do I find that? And so having a way to go back in and do that, and we did that for many, many years. We actually started to memorize where things were at in documents. So if you can imagine, there's piles and piles of manuscripts, and I'm like, you know what, Dunn had that, I think he had it under this heading, and I think it was in this part of the document. Well, that's not efficient, right? And so for years we struggled over what to do. And what we ended up doing was we started to create our own tools for managing our data. And so what I want to do is I just very quickly want to demonstrate using the terms we were just looking at as a way for you to kind of see how we can get at it. Now this is a new piece of software for us. We looked and looked and looked, and we could find no existing software that would allow us to upload high-resolution digital copies of our manuscripts, page by page, allow us to analyze and process the data, and upon looking up things, we could get back to the page that it was on. Because one of the things that will happen is, no matter how good of a job you think you've done, whether you're a linguist, a community researcher, or whatever, you'll always want to be able to get back to that original page. Either you may have mistranscribed a letter, a vowel, or you might just want to see the context that that word was taken in, so what was recorded around it. So there's lots of reasons to want to get back to your original document. So, MIDA is the Miami, Illinois Digital Archive. You'll see the word Illinois in there. That's the kind of linguistic label of our language. In our community, we just say Miami or Miami in English, but the actual language itself is Miami, Illinois. It's a cover term for what were several dialects of this particular language. We don't have enough material to understand what all the different dialects are. We can kind of see hints of it, but there's not enough there to reconstruct the dialect. So we use all of the entire corpus of this material to revitalize what is today called Miami, Illinois. Okay? So basically, there are lots of ways to search. There are lots of fields in this. I'm searching a morpheme, ishim. I can search any document. Right now we have actually two. This Le Gillier is not actually in there yet. And so if I just search for the morpheme ishim, it's going to pull up all of the original hits from original documents that contain that morpheme. So notice this one right here. By clicking on that, I get this. And then I can pop down any one of these fields. Not sure why that's not lining up. I think it might have to do with the projector. And then also a lot of the morphology work that's done. So I can locate other terms, and this one also has Ingwe in it. So Kikingwe, so there's the Kikingwe Shim right there. But the thing I can do is this particular entry is on page 416, line 4, phrase 2 of this particular document. If you want to know about this document, you can go there and learn all about that document. But for our purposes, I want to just simply see the original. So I can pull up the original document. I can even go right to line 4, which is right up here. Oops, let me get to... Oh, there it is right there. See it? It's right here. That's that word. So I can always get back to the original document. I don't have to worry. And I can search within a manuscript. I can search across manuscripts. What this allows me to do, if I'm struggling with a particular morpheme or I'm not sure about a particular word, I can go look it up and see if by chance it exists somewhere else, see what the translations are, all of that sort of stuff. So it's a really, really powerful tool for us when documentation is our sole source of being able to find that material. Now, this is a research tool. This is not a language learning tool. For a long time, we tried really hard because we have learners, and I'm still trying to get to the learner here. We have learners that want this information, right? And for the longest time, we tried to create online dictionaries that serve the needs of both the language researcher and the learner. And we tried really hard, and we constantly got complaints from our learners. I don't care about your morphemes. I don't want to see that crap. Give me something. I just want to be able to say this. I'm walking down the street. I'm wanting to be able to say something. I want to be able to get on my phone, search it, get it, have an audio file, and be done with it. I don't care about the linguistics. And so what we ended up doing is pulling these things apart. So we created a dictionary with a handheld app that is very simple. It's got a simple search window, gets you right to it, and I'll show you that here in a minute. And we just let the research tool be the research tool. Just let it be. That way our researchers can design this and develop this in whatever way they want. They don't have to think about the learner, right? But one of the challenges we had was we didn't want to have to recreate things like sound files and re-enter text for the learner. So what actually this is set up to do is behind this interface lives databases that contain the data, including the audio files. So as we create new things, we can then draw on those data sets and link them without having to recreate or re-enter data. So what we've learned over the years is that as time goes on and as we begin to continue to analyze this stuff, our databases and our audio file database and all that continue to grow and grow and grow and grow, and they can continue to grow in a form that none of us actually see. The computer science folks know how that gets stored in the cloud or wherever in the heck it is they put it. But when we create a new tool, and I mentioned earlier that we were trying to create an app for our lunar calendar, that lunar calendar app will draw on the data that's generated through this process. We don't have to retype it or recreate it. Uh-huh.
What if you don't know the morpheme boundaries? You don't know that it's a morpheme, but just you have this string, you don't know where the morpheme begins or ends. Can you just look for a string?
Yeah, you can search a word. So let's search well, actually, a lot of times what this mainly will get used is they'll search the English. So if I just search something like house, I can search the English translation in any document anywhere in the world, and I get this. I lead you to this house, so there's all the things we can get. Now, to answer your question, yeah. So you have to know two things. You either have to know how it was spelled in the older records, or you have to know if it's in the modern spelling system or the modern orthography. So if you know that, yeah, you can search the whole word. And it's even set up that you're allowed to do mistakes. Since we have long vowels, if you just type in one vowel instead of two, much like Google, how you misspell something but you still get the hit, that's built into the system. So it allows us to have a certain level of error so that we can still find something. And that's true with the next piece, which is I'm going to show you. So this is what the online learning tool looks like. Now this is also on an app on a phone. You can get through it through the Apple Store. It's free to anybody. And it just simply has a search window. I type in picture, and there's all your terms. Now, what won't show up, see, this is a stem. On the iPhone app, what you'll get is you'll get the hits here. And those hits are arranged based on what people are searching. So we built into this particular system that whatever is the most commonly thing searched, again, like Google, that's what tends to show up on the top. Because, again, this can get filled up with all kinds of different things, right? And it also has the ability to allow for a certain degree of error as well. So we're finding that the language learners are really using this because it's on their handheld app or handheld device, and they can pretty much find whatever they want. This also has audio files. And there's audio on the handheld device as well, so it's real quick and easy to use. People want quick. I want to be able to say this. I want to be able to find it. So. Uh-huh.
Alice wants to know what selfie I sent out of those.
How do you take a picture of you? Because that would be selfie. So I was just wondering what that would be.
I would say kikishando kiawe. Take a picture of yourself. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was saying to Leila earlier. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, kikishando kiawe. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So what I had hoped to do is, we're working from source documents, and there's a high level of research that has to go on to produce this, but ultimately there's the learner. And I think there's a pathway here, and there's a certain level of development here that is going to take time, but it's very, very significant, and it's going to allow all of you, and it has allowed us, to be more efficient at what we do. What I didn't really realize once we created MIDA, which is the research tool, is that other people would be using it. So, we've got other staff that are developing curriculum. We've got people that are doing botanical research, historical research. They're now going into MIDA and searching things, coming up with a list of words. They'll send those over to the language people and say, what do these really mean? What's the context for these? And so other people are actually able to engage in research that aren't linguists in linguistic documents for the purpose of continued tribal program development. And that's been I think, a pleasant surprise. I've really enjoyed seeing teachers who aren't trained linguists actually using that to develop content for their curriculum. So again, there's this whole process of identifying, scanning, transcription, building of the databases, and then this can be anything. There can be all kinds of different ways of accessing that data. So.
So are you to see it goes from transcribing, translating to spreadsheet to uploading entries into the database? So when you're actually working with this material, everybody's doing it in a spreadsheet, and then you upload it to a database, or do you have a web interface for your database?
There is a web interface, and you can go in to do certain kinds of analysis. But for the initial transcription, and maybe even initial translation for some of our French documents, it's more efficiently done in a spreadsheet.
Just because people know how to use that well? Or?
People? These are all researchers doing this.
Right. So,
This is not your typical community member doing this work, no.
right, but I'm just curious because there's many different ways of doing that. With the reason for going with spreadsheets?
Well, spreadsheets for us is the most efficient initial way to get the data uploaded, especially the data that appears on the document. So whatever the original form of the word and the translation, throw it into a spreadsheet. So you've got your document open, you're going through and you're transcribing, you can just just type it into a spreadsheet, right? And then when that gets done, then this software will allow you just simply to upload it and automatically connect it to the pages that it's supposed to, right? And then from there, the linguist will go in and do the analysis on the web base. So there's an administrative login. I guess it's maybe up at the top. Oh, sign in right here. So right now there's only, we control who can get in here and actually do the work. And I think right now there's only 3 or 4 people that can actually get in here and do that work. And so David Costa, our linguist, is the one that primarily is in here now. Now, the work, the analysis work, I don't know how long that'll take, but it's going to go way beyond our lifetime. So our goal was to try to set something up that allowed us to store everything together, make it easily accessible, find it, get back to the original source material, and allow it to be something we can continue to develop over time so that future work can be done by individuals that are going to do this after we're gone. So, this software we created and we're going to maintain. You know, for the longest time I used proprietary software. I got burned a couple times, lost some data. Either that or the entity didn't keep up with that version. In one case, I put 10 years of research into a piece of software that was discontinued. That was pretty painful. And so we started to use open source software that we thought had some stability to it. So like Wikipedia, we used Wikipedia form of it for our early dictionary. And I think that was okay, but we were restricted in what we could do with it. And we finally reached a point in our own development where the Mya Center we felt was stable enough to go ahead and start developing its own tools to do very specifically what we needed to do on the pretense that we would continue to maintain it and develop it over time. So that gives us a lot more control, and we work very closely with the university system where these materials are all housed, backed up in the university system, but we retain proprietary control over all of its content. So the other thing to realize is everything that comes out of the Mya Center is copyrighted by the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma through the Mya Center. Yeah, right now this says Mya Center, but that will change to Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. So.
Have you considered making this program available to other endangered languages?
Well, that's a very good question. It has always been our intent to try to create things in such a way that they could be shared. I don't know that we have the capacity to do the sharing, but we want to construct things in such a way that they could be shared. So the question there is how does it get shared? So we very recently reached out, because of our partnership with Smithsonian's Recovering Voices, reached out to Recovering Voices and says, can we make a clone of this? Can we call it something different? And can you folks share that with someone? And let's do a pilot project and let's test its shareability. And so actually at Breath of Life this year, a group in Oregon, the Tututni group, is going to be using it and trying to upload their documentation into it as a pilot to see if it works. Now if it works, then the future means of sharing will probably be handled through Recovering Voices at the Smithsonian. So we don't want to get involved in that. But what we'll do is we'll continue to maintain the software through Miami University and through the center. So we're very excited about it. We've had a couple of short sessions with the Tututni group, and it seems to be working very well. They're very excited that this is what they need, and it's not that complicated of a software, but it allows us to find the things we want. The thing to realize is that even though it has a database function to it, it's really a digital archive. It's not intended to replace softwares like Flex. Flex does something very different than this. It's not in competition with other linguistic softwares. It's intended to be the digital archive and to be able to find things in that digital archive with a limited amount of analysis. So what I'd like to be able to do is, if it works well, that if a community were to go in and upload a bunch of materials and do some analysis, that there would be a way that that data could be moved over into a software like Flex if they wanted to. So we'd like to be able to create that pathway. So ideally, it would be nice if these softwares could share data. So. Mm-hmm.
When coming up with this software, I find it really interesting because even with your calendars, it seemed that you always were trying to you're trying to not make it fit into the colonial what there already is. You kind of are making your own stuff that fits your culture, and that's why it works so well, right? Is because it's made by you for you, and I just think that's really exciting. And when you were going into this, were you thinking about that, the format?
I think we're driven by two things. We're driven by need, which I think you very pointedly connected to, and what works.
Yeah.
You know, I think, and within that there's some compromise, right? But that pretty much is what drives us, what the need is and what actually works. And there's things we've done in the past that didn't work very well, and and you know, they fade away. We don't use them anymore. But this is working very well for us. This is,
Seems very exciting.
yeah. Yeah, especially for communities that are working from documentation and need to be able to organize that data so that they can do things with it, right? And the idea too is our next step, if phase one with the Tututni group goes well, then they have an interest in using the dictionary part for their learners. So since that's already connected in ours, it would be very easy to connect once they get some data in. Then. So the nice thing about this, and again, the technology is really kind of fascinating to me. I don't know much about it, but you see this right here? This little speaker is set up in such a way that if it's typed in properly and there's an audio file that's been added to the dictionary, it'll automatically connect. You don't have to do anything. Just simply type in the word in, it'll automatically connect to the audio file. So there's little shortcuts like that that are just incredibly efficient. But when you're working with this much data, efficiency is everything. So let's just kind of open it up to random questions. It doesn't have to be about this. It can be about anything that's on your mind, things you're thinking of.
So I'm wondering about some of the nuts and bolts of how you gather the resources together to create something this impressive, because there's so much that goes into it.
Right.
Different kinds of knowledge, but also people's time and so whose time is it, and how did that work that you were able to marshal those resources?
Right. This is really the function of the center. And this is why I think your relationship with an institution like UBC has a lot of potential. Without the center, without the support of that, and the center is really tribal space that exists within an academic setting. What that means is that we get to engage in the things that are central and important to us. And then we reach out into the many departments that are there, whether they be computer science or whatever it may be, and we do a lot of work through graduate students, we do some work through undergraduates, create teams of individuals who first serve as kind of a think tank, what's possible. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll get an undergraduate course in computer science and say, here's our idea, take it and run with it. And then through the course of the semester, let's see what's possible. And then if we can come up with a tangible thing that actually looks like it's going to work, then we'll take that idea and we'll pass it off to a graduate student who will have their assistantship through the center. So they'll essentially be working for the center for the 2 years that they're there, and then they'll develop it. This was entirely developed by graduate students over the course of 4 years. And it finally got it to where it's really doing what we need it to do. The funding for it came from National Endowment for the Humanities. Not all of our funding comes from grants. The grants that we do get are usually for projects, but the tribe also funds several projects. So much of the operating funds for the Miyamiya Center are actually tribal funds. So we have a lot of flexibility to pick and choose the kinds of resources that we really need. And our relationships with faculty on campus is really extraordinary. We've got several retired faculty that retain their working relationship with the center and continue on a consulting basis, even after retirement. They'll come in and help manage projects, oversee graduate student work, and so we don't have to get bogged down in a lot of that kind of stuff. We let faculty members do that work. We're there to drive these projects forward. So your relationship with, and this is what I was getting at when I said partnerships in my opening, if you can develop good, strong partnerships and you can step into that space and be able to drive the direction of what you need, that can be very, very powerful for you. I saw his hands back there.
Yeah, you were talking about kind of building things to assist you in your process, and it does seem like there's a lot of avenues that could potentially assist you. Like, for instance, I imagine just going through all the old documents for the first time must be incredibly labor intensive. Like, what avenues are you exploring to perhaps assist with that, like image recognition software to help and stuff like that? Like, I don't know if that is an avenue you're exploring just to kind of allow your linguists and stuff the process of the actual translation that probably can be automated because it requires so much.
Well, when it can be automated, it's certainly great, but for right now, because of the condition of the original documents, we actually have a part-time staff member at the center whose real sole purpose is to do transcription work. So she basically lines things up. So she's working on other documents now that we're preparing to upload into my. And the nice thing is they may spend a year transcribing a rather large document and preparing the digital images, but once they're uploaded, they're immediately available for search, which is really, really slick. We're going to be probably next fall uploading another major document.
Yes, I don't know if you have the pleasure of meeting Kathy Ward, but the Cascas have a dictionary, a huge dictionary, and maybe you can get together with Pat and look at our dictionary and give us some feedback if we need it.
Yeah, dictionaries are really powerful tools. We're kind of in transition. We printed a dictionary several years ago in print form. Standing here today, I don't know that we'll ever make more of those. Everything is so digital, and because our learning base are younger people, it's handheld devices. The dictionaries are really, and with the power of being able to search immediately thousands of references while you're walking down the street, again, bringing language into your daily life is really just becoming the direction that things are going. So I don't know that we'll ever actually print another dictionary in the future. And this isn't set up to print anything. So that, you know, it could bite us in the rear 20 years from now, but I don't think technology is going to go away. So.
I just really wanted to start off with saying that I like what you said about the youth movement and with the elders' support. It's so true. But my question is, I wanted to ask you what you did to engage your community into like knowing the importance of like learning the language and like getting the motivation to do it.
Yeah, so the question was, in order for a youth movement to develop, what was the process in engaging with the community to make that happen? I think something happens when you lose your speakers. The community is really left to figure out what to do. And it's not an easy, there was a lot of, I won't say resistance, but skepticism early on about why do this. And justifying putting tribal financial resources into language development for a language that didn't have speakers. There were some questions. And what I think has happened over the years is through the experience of doing the work. In other words, it was very important for us to develop a relationship as those in the community who were really trying to drive this forward, to develop our relationship first and foremost with community. You know, visiting with elders, families, parents, getting to know those families, developing the youth programs, just getting started. It doesn't matter how good we did it. We just simply got started and the community was involved in that. Leadership observed that process. They watched it for a while. And then slowly, over time, young people started to emerge that felt differently about themselves, that this experience of learning your language and culture changes the way in which you connect with your heritage. And I know I've heard people say that all week long. The community has to observe that happening. And I think that that's where you start to build a value for it, right? It's a value that comes about through actually doing it. And now today, it's not even a question. I mean, it's the entire community, the entire leadership structure is 100% behind this effort because they're now seeing the tangible outcomes of why do this. Everything from increased graduation rates of our tribal youth. So we had about a 40 to 60% graduation rate among our tribal youth that were coming to Miami University prior to language and cultural infusion in their experience. Today our graduation rate's 90%. So we actually have information that we can share back to the community, share back to the tribal leadership to say, see, this is helping our community become well again. And the amount of giving back that is coming from the generation of youth that have come up through this effort is helping them rebuild that community infrastructure that's very, very important to holding and supporting a language revitalization effort. So it takes time. I don't know how many generations, it's an intergenerational process, but after 25 years, we're saying we're more convinced now that this is absolutely the right thing to do for our nation, not just for us as individuals. We all connect to it differently, but for our tribal nation, this is by far the most important thing. It's why we're in business. We are in business to survive as a culturally distinct people, and our language and culture and our ability to educate our youth are critical to that process. So you just have to demonstrate, you have to show it in order for people to buy into it. So. All right. How are we doing for time?
We are happy to entertain more discussion.
Mike Hinge on Growling Bellies. Anything else?
Well, oh, okay.
But maybe you can expand on this. How you go in general, like about innovations, some new words. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but about things that maybe you didn't find in the records, and you have to kind of come up with a way to say things that if you could just kind of talk
Yeah.
You know, we're at an interesting place where we know just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be able to do the things we really want to do in terms of new word creation. So this year for our tribe students at Miami, they were challenged with creating a map of Miami University and creating names for like dorm and student center and activity center and so on and so forth, so that they could then have dialogue about their life on campus with each other and with their friends. And so we were really challenged by that, because there's times when we just need a morpheme that we know probably existed or may still be in the records we haven't found yet, that would give us the concept or the meaning that would allow us then to create a whole new set of language, just much like the photograph stuff here. And then would allow us to make just one more leap forward. And sometimes you just have to be patient. If it's not there, I think for now we just stay away from it. If it's not there, we don't try to force it. We just wait it out. And partly that's because we know we have so much material that we haven't processed yet that it's probably in there somewhere. So our navigation isn't a straight line. We're not going from point A to point. We're kind of going like this as we move along, much like the salmon that probably spawn the rivers. That's what I thought of. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are there other families now who are trying to use the language in their homes? And if so, are those what kind of resources are those families drawing from the center?
There's a growing interest, and the reason there's a growing interest is because we are now at a stage where our new parents, those in their mid-20s, came up through our early programs. So they were just 10 or so years old when they came into our A1 Zapata program. Several of them came to Miami University. They're now starting to have families of their own. And that's a really exciting place to be at, because this year we're bringing on a new staff member to start to organize the materials and the direction for language in the home. And what we want to do is we want to reach out to those families who have come up through this effort to help us create those tools. So this is for the benefit of their children, and I think that's going to be a really powerful combination for us. So we're looking to create a team of about 5 or 6 individuals. Some of them are actually trained educators. They have degrees in education, and they understand the learning process, and to work with the center to start developing those tools. So that's a very new thing for us that we're just looking. But language in the home, again, getting back to my own experience, it's by far the most productive place to really make things happen. But you need a community, right? A language can't survive just in the home. It really needs a community to interact with. And so those are great starting points, but you got to figure out how to put the pieces together. All right. Well, I'll be around for a good part of today, but unfortunately I apologize that I'm on a flight back east tomorrow morning. If any of you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to myself at the center, and we'll be more than happy to engage with you in any way, and share anything that we have. If you get on our website, miamiacenter.org, you can kind of get a sense of what we're developing. If you see something on there you're interested in, just write to me and I'll get a copy in the mail to you. So, okay, Missionewe.